Hello and welcome to the session UI UX Best Practices for Designing Amazing Web Apps. My name is Michael Geik and I'm co-presenting today with Alan Lavramboise. I am the lead of the UI UX Tech Center in our Professional Services division, and we work on many of our internal products like ArcGIS Indoors or ArcGIS Analytics for IoT, besides others, and approximately 50 custom projects for web mapping applications each year. Today we are going to talk about how to design amazing web apps. And I'm going to first talk a little bit about UX design and why it is more than only gathering requirements. Then I will talk a little bit about the importance of understanding your user and the process behind it. Before we dive into map UI patterns and best practices. Last but not least, Alan is going to give you a behind the scenes look at what I think is one of the coolest products here at Esri, the Vector Tile Style Editor. So let's get started. UX design is more than only gathering requirements, and let me illustrate it through an application that landed on my desk. And so more or less halfway through budget, somebody gave me this application with a request to polish it up, to beautify it. And to be fair, all the requirements were met. Everything is in there, but I didn't quite know where to start. There are a couple of really obvious flaws. And I'm wondering if you know, but I don't even know what this application is about. There's no title, there's no tagline, there's nothing that tells me who this is for, what I can do. There's a menu that has lots of buttons, but I need to almost pogo stick through all the menus to find out what's behind it, because the menu is using icons that are really meaningless to me. Adding a label to those icons would already be more helpful and meaningful to me. Besides that, there's a couple of different ways to do searches. I don't know why. And finally, there's this huge map that really doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't show me where to start, what I can do. So asking me to beautify this app is like bringing a broken car to the car wash. It still doesn't fix it. It needs a major overhaul. So how can we do this? I suggested to the project managers to actually revisit the whole design and think about how we can approach this differently. And his response was, okay, just do your thing. So fast forward, this is what we eventually came up with. And I guess you get the idea. First of all, you know what this application is about, right? It's about finding your representative. And there are still multiple searches, but they are now laid out in a way that makes sense to somebody that comes to this application and might want to search in multiple ways, either by location or by name. The other thing you can see is that the map actually became auxiliary to the application. It's not map-centric anymore. But looking closely at the map, you actually see that there's one more flaw. You see that there's this large area, which is Canada, that is using a lot of space on the map, but is really not useful for the purpose of this application, right? So what we did is we worked with Sarah Bell from our cartography lab to help us redesigning the map itself. And what she came up with is this. So she not only changed the symbology and cartography so it matches the UI of our application, but she was also able to find a map layer that pulls Alaska and Hawaii closer to the US mainland, so we can focus on the states. In addition, this map actually even invites users to click on the states which we can use as a search criteria. So just by doing some simple changes, we improve the usability of this application drastically. And that also shows you that just because you implement all your requirements doesn't mean that you have a great user experience. Which actually brings me to my next point. It's really important to understand your users, to know who your users are and what they need. And to illustrate that, let me walk you through another example. And for a moment, imagine that you are a city. And as a city, you have trash trucks that roam the city across predefined routes. And you have all those routes available in your GIS system. So you want to make this information available to your citizens so they can find out when their trash pickup day is, right? So the first idea that comes to mind is, well, how about we create a map and we show all the routes? Well, this is probably not the best approach. It might just clutter the map. So our next idea might be, how about we aggregate all those routes into polygons, and then we show those polygons in different colors, and starting from the top, the blue might mean it's trash pickup day is Mondays, red is Tuesdays, orange is Wednesdays, and so on. So you get the idea, right? So a user that comes to the site only needs to click on the map to see exactly, I see, my trash pickup day is on Friday. And it's a long route, 585. And there's actually 3 routes, and I can toggle through the routes. So it's route 585, 595, and 545. Right, so this is one potential approach, and that's maybe the approach that we as a city are most comfortable with. So let's think about how a user might actually want to see it. Maybe all they want to see is Friday. Or if we want to get fancy, maybe they want to see Friday 13th, 2020. That's all they care about. So what's the difference between the two approaches? The difference is that on one hand, we have a conceptual model, which is how we lay out our data, typically in tables, layers, and then because we have layers, we want to show it on a map, and that's how we show it to our end users, and how users think about the problem. We call it the mental model. And the mental model is, I only want to have a quick answer, and it's Fridays. So sometimes we also talk about business needs versus end user needs. So next, what I try to do is I try to map the usability and the cost for each of those approaches, and we can now start to try to wedge them against each other, right? So on the left-hand side, we have maybe a ready-to-go template that allows us to visualize our data and bring it, and publish it immediately. All right, that might be really low cost, but it might also come with a downside, which is maybe low usability, because users now have to fiddle with a map, and that's not what they expected. On the other hand, we have the idea for an application, but the application doesn't exist yet, right? So there's a cost associated with designing and building this application, but the benefit would be we most likely end up with a high usability. So to make a decision on the right approach, which way to go, we really have to define success. What does it mean to be successful? For example, if there's the reason for your application is to publish data, make it available to the public, maybe because it's a mandate, you have to publish this data, you have to make it available, then a template is perfectly fine, because guess what? You're done, right? If your success criteria is to be a model GIS city, or you want to best serve your users, which is the citizens, and you want to avoid trash lying around on the streets, well, maybe it actually warrants the additional cost to build a custom application. The decision is really up to you. So typically, in order to make this decision, we have to understand the end users and their needs. And the way we do that is by defining personas. And the way we define personas is through research. We go out, we interview our target audience, we maybe run a survey, and maybe we look into our service calls to find out what our users are complaining about. And then we come up with fictional characters represented as personas, where we highlight what the goals of those personas are, what their pain points are, what their motivations are, and we use those to drive our design decisions. I completely understand that sometimes we don't have time, we don't have budget to do all of this, so what I've done is I've actually created a little cheat sheet of 5 personas that I want to share with you. Fair warning, those personas don't always match exactly your needs, and it doesn't mean just because you have this cheat sheet that you don't have to do your own research. All the opposite, I encourage you to actually do it. But it's a good starting point if in case you don't have the time or money to do it. So each of those personas can be mapped to a certain application type. Like an expert user might use an enterprise application, while a mobile user, well, guess what, a mobile application. In between, I have a set of needs and data needs and application needs that can help you making a decision on the right application type you might choose. So for example, for our trash pickup application, most likely the audience is public and what they need is answers. And those answers, they have to be relevant and very specific. So that means the data that we need to prepare has to be able to provide these specific answers quickly. And the application will most likely be very focused. Another way of looking at those personas is in terms of, for example, attention span, the time spent on a page. So for our public user, most likely they will spend very little time on our application. They want answers immediately. They have a very narrow center of interest or activity, and they're very focused on their area of interest. They're only interested in their house, their street, the immediate neighborhood. We call it the large scale versus maybe an expert or an analyst. They care about the whole city. So coming back to the initial screen that you've seen, it most likely does not make sense to show a resident a map of the whole city because they only care about their house. So what I've done is, and sometimes I do that in my spare time. I mean, call me a nerd. While other people maybe sit at home, watch Game of Thrones or read a book or something, I sketch stuff, right? So I just was so enticed by this problem that I sat down and I started sketching of how to potentially solve this within an application. And I came up with these sketches. On the left-hand side, you see how, like a desktop version could look like. On the right-hand side, maybe how the mobile version of the same could look like. And, I enjoyed it, but then I kind of tucked it away in my backpack until a couple of days ago, one of my sons came running and said, Daddy, look what I found in your backpack. There's a treasure map. And I said, like, what? What are you doing in my backpack? And this is not a treasure map. That's how Daddy earns his money. Well, anyway, I took these, call them low fidelity sketches, and I created wireframes using a software called Balsamic. And this is an example of how a city could potentially show itself to its citizens. So imagine there's the city of Winston-Salem, and a user comes to the application, sees some basic information, and all they need to do is they need to click on this little Locate Me button, which actually places them right at their current location, which most likely is their house. And now they see very focused information about this location. They see property details, more information about the neighborhood. They see that there are no current outages. And guess what? That trash pickup day is Fridays. So that's a very, once we know more about our target audience, once we understand our users and their needs, it really helps us to design the right application that solves their problems. So that's why it's really important to understand your users. Hand in hand with understanding your users, understanding the business needs, is having a process. And first off, I want to ask you, do you think the following examples are good designs? So here is an application for a reinsurance company called Guy Carpenter. It's an enterprise application. Here's an application for the US Census. Here's a dashboard application for the city of Abu Dhabi. And here's a product that we designed some time ago, GeoPlanner for ArcGIS. So are those outstanding, amazingly great examples of designs? Yes, of course, because we did them. No, joke aside, we really don't know, because it's only a snapshot, it's only a screenshot, it's only the output of something, and without knowing the process that went into this final end product, we cannot really judge if it met the business needs and the end user needs. And maybe the design is only like a dribble sketch that somebody came up with, but is impossible to implement. We don't know. So the answer here is design, and great design is when you follow a continuous process. Design is very rarely based on a stroke of genius. It's a painfully taken design process. In many cases, it starts with research, like interviews or surveys, which inform our analysis, and typical output of analysis is personas. I've already talked about it. And then those personas directly influence our design decisions, right? So we ask questions like, would Larissa Spinelli need this function? How would Larissa do the following? And once we have our wireframes, we can do design validation, and typically that's in the form of usability testing or guerrilla usability testing, so there's different methods, but we're trying to validate whether our designs actually meet the specifications. And I completely understand that, again, in many cases, maybe your project is not big enough to warrant all those different UX processes and methods, or sometimes maybe you don't have the capabilities to do it. If you cannot do any of those, the only thing I need to ask you to do is wireframes. Wireframes is the foundation of any application design, and we've tried it many times to omit wireframes. We went straight to mockups, prototypes, even front-end development, but we always came back to wireframes. Wireframes are the contract between what needs to be built and what will be built. And it needs to be a process between your stakeholders, your clients, and the development and project team to make decisions of what's in, what's out, are we solving the right problem, and so on. So in this case, those are wireframes for the application I showed you previously, the Guy Carpenter, and maybe version 1 is very basic, and then version 2 is more elaborate, and until finally version 3 is actually very close to what we know we want to build. And even though those wireframes are throwaway products, it's crucial and essential that you do them without going down a development strategy just to find out that you've built something and you spend time on something that is actually not needed, or you end up solving the wrong problem. So now I show you a mock-up that we've created after the final version of the wireframes, and you see the mock-up is very similar to the final version of the wireframes, and the application the same. So how do we measure success? How do we know that our process actually works? And there's a couple of ways we can do that. This is an application we did for Vexel Imaging in conjunction with the Geospatial Intelligence Center, and it's called Virtual Inspection Studio. The client came to us with the ask to build a Web Builder widget. What we did is we did a 2-day user experience workshop where we first tried to understand the business needs, talked about the end user needs, defined personas, users personas to do experience mapping, And throughout the process, we realized that our original idea of this Web App Builder widget was actually not really fruitful. And there was actually something else that had a really high return of investment if we could only build that. And based on that, we used the second day to do a rapid wireframing, and we came up with what is now known as the Virtual Inspection Studio, where an insurance company can verify insurance claims after a catastrophic event like a wildfire to make sure that the claim is actually true. And they do it by comparing the high-resolution imagery that Vexel Imaging is providing to them. So whenever they showed this application to potential clients, the feedback was, this is exciting, I need that. And that was the main selling point, and it was only possible after doing the user experience workshop. Another measure of success is if it is being showcased, if it's shown to a wider audience, and that means that you're doing something right. In our case, whenever our applications end up on a big stage at a user conference, we know we've done something right. So for us, that's a success criteria. And finally, if it works, great. But how do we know that it works great? Well, we do know because we've done multiple iterations of usability testing, and we were able to improve on the feedback and the observations we've gathered through the usability testing. So we were able to measure our success, and that's why we know it works great. And that's also part of the process. So following a certain process is very important to the outcome and the quality of your final product. Last but not least, and that's a question I get many times, what are best practices for designing map applications? And yes, there are best practices. They're on mapuipatterns.com, and they outline solutions to observed and recurring design problems. And they are typically defined as the problem, what is the problem statement, the context in which the problem occurs, and the solution. Let me give you an example. So let's assume you have an application that shows depots and wants to connect the depot with all the suppliers. The way to do that might be through straight lines, but as you can see on this image, those straight lines actually don't really work well. So what's the solution? Well, we could now get into endless iterations of finding a solution, but guess what? There is already a solution, and it's described in a UI pattern, and the UI pattern has a name. It's called flow map. And even better, somebody at Esri took that pattern and implemented it. So it was actually Sarah Bell from our cartography lab in conjunction with Jacob, one of our most capable developers at Esri, who built this. And that's now available to you. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over. So when you go to mapuipatterns.com, you find lots of outstanding examples of best practices. How do I know that they're outstanding? Because I did that, shameless plug, but please visit it. If you have any feedback, let me know, please. This is work in progress. I hope you enjoy. But let me introduce some of them. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about all of them, but for the purpose of this presentation, I want to introduce you to the empty state, to the task-oriented pattern. Then we talk a little bit about layouts, and eventually I show you some solutions to how to deal with complex data. So the empty state, that's something that is mostly overlooked when you design applications. And a good example is this store locator. And that was given to me by somebody asking for some feedback. And there's actually, it actually looks really good. There's nothing really wrong when you look at it because it's already populated. But when you think about the empty state, how the application would look like before a user has typed or interacted with this application, you see that there's actually lots of wasted space. So we have the search results that don't exist yet because I haven't searched for anything. And the same with the filter, I don't really need it until I search. So what we could do is we could remove those elements, which want some space for us, and we can move the input into the lower part. When we now condense the UI, you see it looks more compact. And not only have we won some space, we actually have even more. We have space for a tagline, and we have space for potentially some coupons or advertisement or what have you. But there's one more thing that needs some work. The map itself also has an empty state. And as you can see, this is just a blank map. There's nothing that shouts at the user, interact with me, come, touch me, right? So changing the map by itself will not only make the map more useful by showing which states do have stores and which states don't have stores, but it also invites the user to click on a state, and maybe that's already our search criteria to show more results. The second pattern I want to show you is task-oriented. That's also very important for all our design considerations. And to illustrate this one, we have a look at the Bay County interactive map, which is, like I say, a built with flags. And as you can see, all the tools are scattered all over the interface, and there's no particular order or visual hierarchy. Sometimes we call this the Swiss Army knife approach, or kitchen sink. I sometimes compare it to Mr. Potato Head, where you use all those functions and features and you just stick them randomly into this potato thing. So that's obviously not a good approach. What's a better approach? After talking with our client, we started thinking, should we create 36 focused web builder apps, or should we invest into building one application that does it all? So we started looking into service calls that came in. We tried to study who the people are that are calling in. We studied the types of problems they had, and there was one really important information that we learned, that we gathered out of all this research, that most of the people are actually very interested in one particular location. So what we did is we decided to implement one application that is map-centric and that has a search box in a prominent location at the top left place of the application, where users can type their address. And as they start typing this address, like beach, we behind the scenes query multiple services and then show those services in the form of suggestions to the end user, and then depending on the type of feature they choose, for example addresses, we kick them into a certain workflow. So now if they select an address, they can analyze the surrounding area of the address and they immediately get the answers. For other types of search results, they would get different types of results and they would be kicked into different workflow. We call it task focused. So all I need to do is I change maybe the search radius, but I have my immediate answers, and I can print them or export them, and I'm done. And so we found it very successful. And whenever you design applications, try to think in the end users, their needs, and how you can present them with a task-focused experience to make them as productive as possible very quickly. So a question I get very often is, what kind of layout should I use? So let me introduce you to a couple of layouts and let's discuss the pros and cons for each of them. The first layout we call a full map. And the full map, I just demonstrated to you, is where the map is the main focus and the core value of the application. In many cases, those are paired with task-focused applications. Another app layout is the partial map, where the map and the content are side by side and they're equally important. And they work really well for workflow-driven applications, where you have the workflow on the left-hand side, maybe paired with some map interactions like selections, and whatever you do on the left-hand side has a direct impact on the right-hand side on the map, and vice versa. So that works really well for enterprise type of application, analytic applications. I've also shown you the reference map already. In a reference map layout, the map is only here for reference purposes. It's typically very limited in types of interactions, and it can be used for navigation purposes, but it's very small somewhere on the side. Just because you have a map application doesn't mean you actually have to have a map. And I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, because in the end we are Esri, right? We are mapping a company. But just because you don't have a map doesn't mean that you're not utilizing the full power of JS behind the scenes, right? Like in this Esri Community Maps application where we use quality controls under the hood to report back the numbers of the data that you've uploaded. And only because we don't have a map on this interface doesn't mean that we cannot toggle to a map. And there's actually 2 links that after clicking on them will lead us to a map layout where we actually do see all these points on the map, but they don't have to be upfront. Another pattern we have is called focus on the subject. And it also means that just because you've chosen a certain layout for your application doesn't mean that you're stuck with that layout. So in this case, we have a full map, and by clicking at one of the schools, we can maybe show the details, and the details show up as a model window, and you see we've toggled between a full map and a reference map. So that's also possible. On mobile devices, I need to mention that partial map is very difficult to implement because you very easily get this slippery effect where you try to scroll down, and because you now suddenly touch the map starts panning and you cannot scroll anymore and you're kind of stuck. So the approach here is to toggle between a reference map and a full map, and I show you a short video that illustrates how you get from this list. When you click on one of those list items, you get to the details, and you have a reference map, and the reference map cannot is not dynamic. But what you can do is you can click on the reference map, which now toggles to a full map, and the map is fully interactive, and that's how you interact on mobile devices. That's the preference here. Here's a quick summary of the layouts, and what I want to highlight here is that the partial map has the huge advantage of being able to embed tools in workflows, and advanced interactions with the map are still okay. Those are the main reasons why partial map is our preferred layout, but depending on your application needs, you might want to choose another type. Let me show you some map UI patterns in practice. So here's an application we've done a long time ago, and there are some obvious things that are wrong. So we have a logo that takes up lots of space. We have lots of text that nobody reads. We know that people don't read on the web. We have a base map gallery that is kind of useless because if I, as the author of the map, don't know what's the best base map for my operational data, then my users probably don't know either. We have, again, multiple searches, and then we have this huge map with lots of dots, and it looks really ugly. Maybe there's something we can do about it too. And then we have this layer list on the left-hand side. So why would anybody ever know how to use this application? Because we're smart. So what did we do? Here's the old version on the left-hand side and our redesign on the right-hand side. We've applied a couple of map UI patterns to improve. So for example, we chose to show a core breadth map to show aggregates of the data at the national level. As soon as users zoom in, they still see the points, but at least it's not that cluttered anymore. We combined the searches into one. We have a locate me button to zoom the users to their location quickly. We have a clear call to action. We call it task oriented. We have browse geographies to let users quickly choose their preferred geography, in our case states. We have a feature selection so users can draw their area on a map. We have a home button to reset the application if users get lost. And then we have place marks for all those geographies that are scattered all over the world and cannot be shown on the map at the same time. So what we did is we did usability testing, and we found out that there were still some issues with the map, or some, I should rather say, some ways to improve. The first one is the visual design. So we toned it down, and we left only the main actions buttons in blue. Everything else became grayish and equal. Another thing we found out that the legend is actually very important. If you have a corporate map without a legend, users don't know what it means. So make a legend readily available, if possible, even visible by default. We were also able to combine the layer list with the dashboard. So now I want to talk about another problem, which is how do you deal with a map that has too many features? And this is the classic example, right? I'm showing all the schools in the United States, and this map is really painful. So the intention that we had when we designed this map is very different to how our users perceive it. How can we solve this? So the first one is we just simply change the markers. So having simple markers is already better, but even those simple markers can be improved to make it even clearer at a national level, and as you zoom in, you get more and more details. Another way to improve this is to start clustering the points, which means that for each area we count the points, and then we show circles in the size of their amounts. And as you zoom in, maybe the individual points start showing up, but the map is at least not that overwhelming anymore. Another way of showing that would be a heat map. The disadvantage of a heat map is that when the points are related to the population, in many cases they are very concentrated around cities. So sometimes we jokingly call heat maps city finders. So be very careful with those kind of visualizations. Another way of dealing with too much data is to start aggregating them. So when you roll them up to the geographic level, like a state, you can show proportional markers to highlight the states that have lots of schools. And that might be very useful at small scales. And then as you zoom in, maybe you change the visualization to the actual school points. You can also choose a dot density map where you show for every 10 schools, you show 1 point, and then you randomly distribute those points within the states, and in that sense you see the states that have lots of schools. The disadvantage here is that users might mistakenly interpret those points as actual school locations, so you have to be very careful about that. And the last one we already kind of talked about is a cooperative map. The tricky part here is very similar to the markers, that it over proportionally highlights states that have lots of schools because they have lots of inhabitants, right? So in those cases, it's very important that you normalize the data by the population, and that will actually turn the corporate map into something very, very different. And you see that actually the most schools per capita are in the Midwest and not in the states that have a higher population like California and Texas. Other map UI patterns you can use is inside of your application. You can let users filter by geography. We call it a spatial filter, or by attributes. And then that way you allow them to reduce the amount of points that are being shown on the map in the first place, and it doesn't look that cluttered anymore. And there's another one, we call it a theme toggle. So instead of showing lots of data across lots of layers, we group them together into themes, and we allow users to toggle through the themes, and in that way unclutter the map. There are more best practices. I encourage you to go out to mapuipatterns.com to learn about how to interact between the app and the map. There's also a design lab that we've put together that shows you and teaches you about the UI foundations. like alignment, visual hierarchy, consistency, white space, balance, unity, and all the good stuff. And there's also a component library for React that follows CalSet guidelines that you can use for your next project. And with that, I want to hand over to Elle, who's going to show you a little behind the scenes tour of our ArcGIS vector tile style editor and all the work that he has done to make this really usable. All right, Elle, you ready?
All right, thank you, Mike. All right, so my name's Alan Laframboise. I want to step you through the next part of our session here, and we want to talk about a real world project that we were faced with a few years ago. So when vector tile base maps came out, there was an instant requirement for people to be able to style them. That's one of the huge advantages of the vector tile base map layers. So we, like the very first thing that we did was we published a blog and we said, you can do this today. You can basically go and find the base map tile layers. You can create your own layer from it or copy the layer over, download the JSON locally, make edits to the JSON, upload it back to your layer item, and then use that layer in your map. And yeah, 13 short steps, so it was quite undesirable at the time, especially considering the complexity of the JSON that was behind the scenes. Really required the user to understand a lot about how the JSON was structured and what edits would have what effect on the map. So really not a good user experience, especially for intro level, developers and designers. So our good friend Renee built this application, which is definitely a step in the right direction. So it allowed you to use an existing copy of a base map layer. So you had to go to your account and still go through the first couple steps of copying the existing layer item, and that would get you the root JSON locally. And then from there, you could open that up. And then in this application, it was displayed out, so you could search for a particular layer. And then when you found a layer, something of interest, you could go and you could edit the actual content itself. So it's still a manual process. You could save the item after it was done and then make use of it, but still not as easy to use as it probably could have been. But it's definitely a quick application that was thrown together, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. But still, given the user requirements and the people who are going to use the app, there was probably more work we could do. So the application prototype lab built this application. And this application kind of solved the first step, and that was, or the first problem, and that was being able to select an existing base map. So you could select an existing Esri base map, and then it would create the item which would host the JSON, the root JSON just locally for you, which was great. So that part was done, and that required you signing in with your account, and that was the only requirement up front. Then what you could do is you could actually search for something like water, and it would give you all of the layers that it found in the JSON that had the word water in it. So the source layer name, and then the ID became available, the zoom level that it was available, type, and so forth. So this was definitely a step in the right direction. It exposed, in a more usable user interface, the different UI. The map is really small though. So if one of the things to consider is, like, we always think about this when we build mapping apps, is like, how big should the map be? Is the map the focus, or are the layers the focus? Like, when does the editor, come into play? And in this case, it was determined that, the layers were the most important feature. But people really wanted to see the colors, right? When you colorize your map and you style it yourself, I mean, that's a really important part. So that's something that definitely needed consideration. And then here's another feature of the same application, where if you couldn't find like a particular editing path, then you could always open up the JSON and you could change the JSON yourself and then save it. So a little bit of a cop out, right, on the design if you open up the specification, but it did give power users the ability to access all of the JSON and make any edit that they wanted to under the hood. So if the UI didn't present it, then that was one way to do it. So then our team took a look at this project. I work for the developer experience team. We build the ArcGIS for Developers website and a bunch of tools to help developers and tutorials and all that good stuff. So we wanted to back up a little bit and just redefine who are the users using it. So we queried a whole bunch of people. We talked to internal people at Esri and external people, and what we found out was we basically had to cater to both spectrums, and that was the designer who wanted just to style a base map, who had a set of RGB colors that needed to be applied in a simple and fast way, and then the hardcore developer who was building an application and needed the style layer as well. So it was we basically had two sets of users who had two completely different skill sets, which makes it really difficult to build an app, a focused and targeted application. But the cool thing is they both wanted to do the same thing, and that's they wanted to style a map very quickly and effectively. So the design challenges that we were faced with right up front was like, okay, how do we build an app to hide the spec? That was number one. We didn't want to expose like any JSON. We wanted to mask the complexity of these layers because the specification is sure it's awesome, it's open and everything, but it is, unless you're a developer and you understand JSON, it is quite complex. So how do we mask that? How do we make it fast and easy for everyone? And like regardless of the user's skill level, they should still be able to use this application. And then give like full power to users who wanted to edit sort of the advanced features of it. So our goal and our mission was to be able to brand a map in 3 steps. So if we could do it in 3 steps, like 3 is always the magic number, right, to accomplish a task, then that was sort of our measure for success. All right, so I'll take you through how the application works. So I'm on the dashboard, or actually I'm on ArcGIS for Developers webpage, and if I just click on the dashboard over here, then I've got this new base map style option. So I can click this button. And what we did is we categorized. So the first complexity is that we have a number of base maps that you can start from because you cannot create a style without starting from an existing style set. All right. So we have all of these different categories here. And so we created this popular one, and we're just going to start with light gray canvas. So this is hopefully giving somebody an option. Now you notice that when this application starts, the call to action is apparent. So the blank state is really an actionable state. So we really can't move forward with the application until we pick a particular style to start working from. So now the rest of the application lights up. And you can see that we really focus on the map visualization. We want them to be able to see the map colors at all different zoom levels. So we have the zoom level indicator on the mini maps down below and the main map, so they can always see, when, like what zoom level they're at, because that's an important customization thing we'll see in a second. Okay, next, the first thing that pops up is this quick editor. So the quick editor pops up, and what I'll do is I'm just going to go to the developer site and pull up one of the tutorials, and we'll follow along that. That way you guys can do this a little bit later on if you want. So there's a style vector base map layer tutorial, and we'll grab some of these colors and just put them in here. So what's happening here is we went through and categorized, regardless of the map that was picked, the base map that was selected, we categorized into these 6 categories. And so there's literally hundreds of layers that are being categorized at this point. So I'll just put some of these numbers in here. So this is for a user who really isn't interested in the specification, right? They just want to colorize a map, and maybe they have 3 brand colors or 6 brand colors that they want to apply. And this could be it if they want to be done at this point. If we want, we can go through and let's see here. We can change the font if we want a little bit too. Make the font like slightly lighter. Let's do this sort of italic light. And let's see, if we want, we can make road width greater or reduce the width if we want, or change the label sizes. And this is going to change all the label sizes. So we're having to iterate through like hundreds of layers and basically built an algorithm to go through and provide like a graduated set label size changes. So it's quite complicated internally, but we obfuscate all of that stuff. Um, all right, so that could be it. If we want, we could be done at this particular point, or we could move forward. So there's a couple things. If we want, we could always, reset the style, and that's a feature that we added here. And if you're like, oh, where did everything go? Well, you can always undo the last move or any set of moves, so or edits. So here I can just undo each of the styling changes that I made earlier. So that's a nice feature. So there really aren't too many tools that become available to you. Just what's required to get the job done. Okay, so let's move on to some of the other tools. So what you might want to do is go to something like water and then select something like lake. And if you just hit a second click on the lake, then we select all of the layers that are in that category and we allow you to colorize them at one point in time. So I'm just going to make them a little bit lighter. Let's make it obvious. We'll make it like a gray color. And that's colorizing all of those layers in one fell swoop. Now, if I just wanted to do one layer, I could pick a single layer, and again, I can toggle its visibility on and off. That's how I concretely know it's that layer. Or the other way to do it too is when you touch the map, everything is live. So I can touch that water area and I can see it brings up that layer in our hierarchical tree view here, and I can go through and make more changes if I want. So you get the idea. So I can change the outline. There's no pattern. I can change the opacity and so forth. So we basically expose the different characteristics and the properties that can be changed. So this starts to get way complicated when you start to look at things like labels. So if you zoom in to labels and we click on like Lake Superior, then it's going to bring up the labels that we can style. So we can set their zoom level, like when they're visible on the map, the size, the fonts, and the colors. You can see it gets into like really fine-grained things like the placement, text justification. Is it centered, right, left, and center? So these are all of the deep, dark components and aspects of the specification again. And we put those all down near the bottom, and just the ones that you want to use most frequently are up top, like setting the visibility and the scale range and so forth. So you can see there's a lot of complexity here, depending on what you want to style. But what was important is being able to go back and forth, to be able to search here for something like water with a search filter tool, or to be able to touch something like water here and then just find it. So it makes it super fast and simple. Now, another thing that people wanted to do was just style by changing overall color. So these are all of the color palettes that are used for the entire style right now. So they're all visible. So I can select one and I can deselect some of these if I want, but I can just change like all the watercolor to something else, maybe like this darker color, and hit apply, and there we go. I've changed that all in one fell swoop. Okay. So let's see. That's that tool. If you want to change patterns for the pattern shades that come in, you can do that as well. And if we think we're done, then we can hit save. I'll just give this a name so I can remember what it is. And I'm going to share it out. So I'll talk through a few other aspects here now. So as this saves, it's going to save any sprites. It's going to save the zoom level of the map. But what's important is this ID value right here. So I'm just going to copy that right now because this is the item ID for this particular map that we just created. And now that's ready for use. So we could download the current style if we wanted to, and that would give us all the JSON. I guess the last thing I'll show you too is if you're really just down for the count and can't figure out, what styles you want, you can use this randomizer, which is kind of fun to use. And then there are different filters that you can use. So like something like analogous and so forth. So these are kind of fun. You could use complementary colors. So we could do that. Let's just save that last one. So I'm going to save that. And okay, next, the last thing I want to show you is like how we actually use this. So I'm going to go back to our handy dandy tutorials, and I'm going to open up the solution, and I'm just going to paste in the ID value and then refresh our application. And that should pull in our styled vector base map. And there it is. Okay, so you get the idea. So the question is, was it successful? We believe so. Basically, we had a few enhancements that we wanted to do, and that came in by adding a feedback button. So we added a feedback button, and that was a great enhancement to the application, so we could hear directly from users, how they were using it and what they're asking for enhancements. And we made a few performance enhancements as well. So that's really it. We wanted to take you through that project to talk about some of the design elements and to talk about how it went through multiple phases and how we really looked at the users to make it really work for the user groups that wanted to accomplish styling vector tile base maps. So I encourage you guys to test drive this application through the tutorials at developersrts.com, and that's all we have for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. This was a really, really good demo of the vector tile style editor. It shows us how important it is to move the burden from the user to the system, which helps the users to free them up. It feels easy to use, and it shows us too that as designers, we have to be like magicians, right? We have to make the trick look seamless, and only then the audience can enjoy the show. And that's what you've done with your design for the style editor. So really, really good job. Finally, I want to point out that there are some URLs that I'm sharing right now. Feel free to go out. And with that, I leave you. I want to say thank you very much. If you have any feedback, reach out to us, to our Twitter accounts or by email. And I hope that your next project will become a great one. Thank you.